Yes. Welcome, everybody, to the second of our LookUp Leading Social Change speaker series. And tonight we're featuring Julia Hoppock, the impact producer from The Social Dilemma. And above and beyond that, she's an amazing person. And as you guys all know, The Social Dilemma is partnered with what we LookUp calls an impact partner, and we're their impact partner. And together we're working to help and empower and embolden you all to create a world, a digital world that is healthier and more humane. So I think for all of us, I mean, particularly for your generation. So it's really an honor to introduce you to Julia, who we've gotten to know. I feel like I know you. Like when I see you in person, it's going to be weird, but one of these days we will. And so I will let her turn it over. Quick show of hands. How many of you heard Samantha speak 2 weeks ago? Samantha Bolton? Awesome. We've got some repeat. We should keep tabs. You guys can get an award at the end for who, even teams represented, because I know the times aren't always going to work for everybody, but this is great. So this is being recorded. Julia will speak for a bit and share her story, and then we'll open it up to questions. And this is a learning and great environment for you to learn from the experts and also just grow as individuals. So I'm going to turn it over to Julia as well. And Tyler Phillips is joining us as we start kickoff. Tyler is a member of our leadership lab and is also, I think, Tyler, are you in Texas? Is that correct? You're at the University of Austin, Texas, right?
I'm at Texas A&M School of Law.
Texas A&M. Oh, sorry. I know that's a big, okay, sorry. I didn't mean to call you the wrong school.
It's all good.
But you have water?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Do you have heat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's 81 degrees here today.
Oh,
it was it got down to like 3 degrees last week. I was without electricity for 3 days. Luckily I got out and was able to go stay at a friend's after the first couple of days. And then we were supposed to I got water turned back on after 6 days with no water to my apartment complex. And all of the building I'm in, all of our water heaters are on the porch, because like in Texas, you don't want like the water heater like keeping the house like super warm during the summer. So all of the water heaters are out on the porch, most exposed to the cold. So all of the water heaters were just completely destroyed. And yeah, I had like water coming out of my fire alarms, my electrical sockets like gushing out. And so they hurry up and turn that off real quick. And so yeah, we're still without water, and there's no telling what other damage there might be from this. But yeah, it's been pretty crazy couple of days, weeks, or it's almost been a week now.
Well, we are so grateful and appreciate that you are here with us. And Julia Hoppock is about to share her story with us, and we're all looking forward to learning from you. So Julia, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can share the screen when you see fit. It's up to you, and you can take it away.
Great. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I will go ahead and share the screen and give you an introduction as part of the presentation. And thank you all so much for being here. It's always a privilege to speak to this group. And Tyler, especially, thank you for joining under such challenging circumstances. Really, really appreciate that. So give me one moment. Hopefully this all works. I feel like my internet today. So, all right. Oh, that's just, oops, present. Just give me one moment. All right, let me try that again. Sorry. All right, well, let these images load. I'm Julie Hoppock, impact producer, as Julie mentioned. I'm based in Denver, so I'm excited that a lot of Colorado folks are on the call. This is exciting. I'm just going to let this load a little and then I'll hit present mode. But excited to be here with you all today because we're going to talk about how we can use stories for advocacy campaigns and why storytelling is important. And I'll tell you a little bit about my experience doing all of that. All right, so let's try this. Okay, I think we're in a better spot. All right, does everyone see a woman holding a sign saying, "Dear Congressman Tiberi"? Okay, great. All right, let's get this started. So I am the impact producer for The Social Dilemma, which means that I work for Exposure Labs. I didn't help make the film, but I am crafting the campaign around the film to ensure that we, catalyze conversations about how we change the way technology is designed, regulated, and used. And before I go into kind of talking about how we can use storytelling for change, I wanted to give you a little bit of background about who I am and my career path so that it sort of makes sense why I'm talking about this, and also because it's always nice to know why we ended up where we are. So I started out my career in journalism. Actually at ABC News in video production and digital production. I learned a lot of production techniques on the job, and I've always been drawn to storytelling, which is why I got into the news. I wanted to write stories. I wanted to meet people and interview them. And that was a very exciting time. And so I did that for a couple of years, and I moved to a different news organization, and I kind of went into it all very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I wanted to tell stories that mattered. I wanted to make a difference, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about, adapting on the fly in the newsroom. You have to learn how to not get too attached to your stories because something will change in the news, and something you worked on for 2 weeks is no longer relevant, and you just have to pick up and move on. And that's also true in activism and storytelling. It can be kind of heartbreaking in that regard, but that's just something, to get used to, and you get kind of tougher. But I sort of, throughout the course of working in my news career, I realized I didn't like the daily grind of just constantly being in reaction mode. It was very stressful. And I also sort of didn't love, we were using kind of some of the tactics that we talk about in the film to get people's attention, salacious headlines, or I got put on this weird, bizarre crime beat where I was covering weird crimes and just telling stories I didn't think mattered. And so I realized I love storytelling and it didn't have to be in the news. And so then I moved on and worked for 10 years at the Pew Charitable Trust, which is a nonprofit in DC. And they do everything from environmental conservation to advocating for public health issues to working with states to, work on their budgets and their efficiency. So I did all of that. And a lot of what I was doing was creating videos to affect change. So creating video stories to help move a policymaker on an issue, to show the personal impact. One of our campaigns was about antibiotic resistance and raising awareness. And so we did a lot of profiles of people who survived antibiotic resistant infections and showed those to Congress members who had power to change these policies to help connect them. So lots of that, done some independent filmmaking, and that's what brought me ultimately to working as an impact producer. So I used a lot of my skills from Pew and working on storytelling and advocacy to help craft a campaign around this film. And that's kind of where I ended up now. So I'd like to kind of just at a high level talk a little bit about why do movements need stories? And I picked this quote from Jacqueline Novogratz, who's the CEO of Acumen, which is an incubator that does social capital raising to help address global poverty. And she also wrote a book, I think it's called The Manifesto. I'm blanking on the name, but anyway, stories matter for they have consequences. The stories we choose to tell often define who we become. So I really like that. That kind of gets at why stories are so important. And so what do they do in a movement? They make the issue personal and relatable. So they may make, for those policymakers, we brought in constituents that were affected by antibiotic resistance. There were real human stories that affected them. There's actually science, I find this fascinating, that when a story is well told and you're listening to a well-told story, the same pathways in your brain are activated as if you were living that experience. So we literally, when we hear a good story, we feel like we're in that person's shoes and we're living it. That's really important movement building, because if it's not personal to you, you may not care to actually affect change and make things happen. Stories are actually more memorable than statistics. There's some research, I don't know how reliable this exact number is, but there are some stats out there that a message told over a story is 22 times more memorable than stats. So you need the stats too, but the story may be the thing that sticks. Again, probably because it's activating those pathways in your brain. Something that's also important is the stories allow the movement to see itself. So the very act of sharing your story, which I know a lot of you guys are doing in your campaigns as part of a campaign, can be very empowering. And it can also make you realize that you're not alone. So if you think about the Me Too movement, that kind of gave agency back to people. They realized that this wasn't a personal issue. They were all sharing their story of having been affected by this, and they got to see themselves as part of a broader movement. And it also gave them agency, you know, turning kind of from victims to survivors. And so that's actually a huge part of it itself. The story can affect the person in power who may have a chance to change something, and that can also empower the very people who can kind of mobilize together, realize they're not alone, and affect change. Stories also can reinforce a vision for a better future. You know, Martin Luther King wrote Letter from Birmingham Jail on the margins of a newspaper, and he connected this civil rights story to his personal experience, his personal fears and motivations. And so all of that, you know, connected a personal story to a larger system. And then finally, I would say stories can create, a little typo there. Stories can create the conditions for change. So I say this not to undermine the rest of my presentation, but sometimes a story in itself is not going to change the world. You know, you make a film, it's not going to change the world on its own. You may make a film and people don't even take a discrete action afterwards. I often, when I worked at Pew and worked with a lot of campaigners and how they developed film campaigns, they would ask me, what action do we want our viewer to take after the film? I sometimes think 9 times out of 10, the right question is, what do we want our viewers to feel after they see a film? And it's that feeling that can create the seeds of change. So there's a shift in the conversation. There's a shift in someone's emotion. It starts a process, starts a conversation. It creates an event. It's not going to be the one thing in itself that causes a change, but it's going to be part of a larger series of actions that can cause change. So I do think it's important to put this in perspective. Stories are great and they're very impactful. You need a whole lot of other infrastructure and all kinds of things that Samantha talked about at the last session to really ignite a movement. So I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and walk through a couple case studies of my own experience. So what I'd like to start out with is when I worked at Pew in 2016, I worked on a video campaign that used story expansion of a marine protected area called Papahanaumokuakea. We'll get into the name later because that's kind of interesting as well. And so basically what this was about was in 2006, President Bush created a marine national monument protecting a large area of the ocean from fishing and extraction and mining. And when I worked at Pew, one of our campaigns, Global Ocean Legacy, which sought to create the first generation of great marine parks, including this one, worked with many other partners and allies to help push President Bush to create this marine national monument. And so, so that happened in 2006. In 2016, we wanted to push the Obama administration to expand that monument. So the goal was to expand this current monument, which is sort of that sliver in the middle. And this is the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, which are hundreds and thousands off of the main islands in Hawaii. And we wanted to expand it even further to what's called an exclusive economic zone to protect even more area. And so that was the goal. And basically, I'll tell you a little bit about the monument before I move into the campaign. The monument itself has a huge cultural significance to Native Hawaiians, which is something I'll get into later, but we wanted to focus on with the storytelling. And this is because they believe that all life originates from these islands and that that's where the spirits of their ancestors go after they die. And so a lot of them actually take voyages way far out to these remote islands to be back with their ancestors. And it's just a huge, it's a really emotional thing for them. I really saw a lot of large 7th generation Hawaiian men just break into tears at the mere mention of these islands and what it meant to them. So that's very special. It also has like 7,000 species, a quarter of which are endemic, and they only exist here and nowhere else. So a really special place that needs to be protected. And we wanted to call for the expansion to help protect endangered species that were migrating past the borders of the monument. And because just the more area of the ocean you can protect, the more you can, build resilience against climate change and ocean acidification. So there's a lot of science behind why we wanted to push the Obama administration to do this. And so, next slide. So here's kind of what we knew. we already knew that. So this picture on the left is Bush signing a proclamation to create the monument in 2006. The guy with the white hair behind him is Jean-Michel Cousteau, and he's ocean explorer Jacques Cousteau's son. He created a film called Voyage to Cure, which was about the first time it was ever caught on camera, an expedition to the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, which were really remote and hard to get to. So it's the first time that any of the species were shown on camera to the world. It aired on PBS. Before it aired on PBS, they did a screening at the White House because they knew the Bushes were thinking about it. And I say the Bushes plural because actually it was Laura Bush's idea, and she got George Bush to do this. And so they held a screening at the White House, and it included, ocean conservation giants like Sylvia Earle, who's in the blue up front. And so the film sparked a conversation, and it moved the Bushes. They saw Native Hawaiians journeying to this place for their kind of sacred traditions, and they saw these species for the first time, and they were already thinking they wanted to do this, but the film helped push the needle. It was that little seed that could help create the condition for change. So we went into this expansion effort knowing that, film worked one time at the White House. There was a screening, it was able to affect change. So we already kind of had that under our belt. Now, this next picture of Obama body surfing in Hawaii is also a little bit of a joke, but my point where I'm getting is that there was political will in the Obama administration to do this. And in no small part, he is, from Hawaii, and so there is that connection there too. But luckily at Pew, we are very connected to policymakers. And so a lot of the campaigners had already been working for years, developing relationships with policymakers. And so they had talked to folks in the Obama administration, and they knew that there was political will for him to create this Marine National Monument. And then the other thing that I meant to mention earlier is that Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii created a proposal that he sent to the Obama administration, and he had a lot of Native Hawaiians, who you'll meet in a moment, sign on to that proposal. And one of the things that was different about the way the proposal for expanding the monument was that they wanted to preserve rights for Hawaiians to visit their sacred land, and also give more power to the Hawaiians, the Hawaiian, National Cultural Affairs Office, to actually run the management of the monument. So there was going to be a shift in power, and we wanted to play on that narrative because that was very important. So the Obama administration wanted to do this. And here's the thing. They had the power to create this monument because of the Antiquities Act in 1906. Any president with an executive order can create a national monument on land or at sea. So they didn't really need anyone to tell them that, to do this. So the political will was there, but they needed political cover. And that's because there was a vocal minority of opposition in Hawaii from the longline fishing industry. They were really ginning up. They were worried about, expanding a monument means that they can't fish in certain areas. It could have economic impacts. So they were ginning up a lot of opposition in Hawaii, and they were being so loud, and they had a lot of money from longline fishing to lobby, that it made it seem that on the ground there was less support for this monument than there actually was. So, but what we were hearing at Pew from all these different politicians was like, everyone in power wants to do this, but we need to show a united front, and why we need to really connect the story about why we need Hawaiians, why Hawaiians are actually more on board with this than it may appear. So that's kind of where I came in on the role of story in this particular movement. So as a video producer and campaigner at Pew, my team and I were tasked to go to Hawaii and tell a story where we could really show that Native Hawaiians were behind this monument expansion, and to try to build some goodwill on the ground in Hawaii. And so we decided the most important thing to do was to pick our messengers. And so that's another thing in any campaign and in storytelling, is think about your audience. We knew our audience were politicians that wanted to, see that there was support from Hawaiians on the ground. So our messengers were Hawaiians on the ground who were supportive of this effort. And they were also very trusted. We picked elders in the community, like 7th generation Hawaiians, that were really trusted. So that was one. We wanted to center the story on the Hawaiians, and center the story on their cultural connection to the islands. And that was not only to build goodwill and to prove that there was this goodwill in Hawaii to create the monument, to expand it, but also because that's the side of the story that the press wasn't covering. They were talking about the environmental benefits of the island, and we wanted to focus on this. So if computer allows, I'm going to play a minute clip of this, and then I can talk a little bit more about the decisions we made for this story.
When we're talking about taking care of the ocean, we're talking about an area of Hawaii that's called Papahanaumoku Kea. Can you say that? Papahanaumoku Kea.
The Papahanaumoku Kea Marine National Monument is an area of highly protected ocean habitat in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. The monument is closely tied to the origin story of the Hawaiian people recorded in an ancient chant. The name means where all life springs. Uncle Saw helped come up with the name and is one of the many native Hawaiians with a special connection to this place.
Papahanaumoku represents the responsibility to care for the place that is our beginning.
The designation marked the beginning of a global.
I was about to end that anyways. I think it was a little bit stutter, but I'll explain if that didn't really play. Oops. Essentially, it just kicked off with the story of Uncle Sol Kahalahala, who's a 7th generation Hawaiian, talking to his granddaughter about what Papahanaumoku Kea means to Native Hawaiians. And so in addition to picking these voices, we also wanted to show the intergenerational story. So we kind of started the film with the grandfather talking to the granddaughter, carrying on this tradition of why this monument has cultural significance. And then we go into the film later about all the scientific benefits of expanding it. But we played on that. And then in the end, we looped it back to the story of him and his granddaughter again. And he's talking about how we need to preserve this for future generations. And so the idea is that we wanted to really play on that intergenerational story, just so that Hawaiians could feel viscerally like, I need to protect this ocean for my grandkids, but also as the world, we all need to protect, where we live on this planet, or there won't be future generations. And so that was a big piece of it. And so then again, just picking really the messengers for this story was critical. And then the other thing that we could do in the video was it worked out. NOAA had discovered, the National Oceanic Administration had discovered a new species of ghost octopus. It's cool, Google it, look it up. They discovered this new thing in the production of this video in the area where the expanded monument was gonna be. And so we could also say that, hey, we're like discovering new species all the time. We can't open up this place to fishing. And so we were able to release a little bit of relatively new footage in the film too, which gave people a reason to tune in. But we made a lot of creative decisions to help use this story in a certain way. And one of them was length. It's 10 minutes long. And we did that because we wanted to be long enough where we were hoping this could air on Hawaii Public Television. We also wanted to screen it at the White House. We didn't know if those things were going to be possible going in, but that was the goal. And so 10 minutes felt like a nice length where it was long enough to get on public television. It was long enough to craft an event at the White House around without it being too long for busy White House officials. And so that was another reason we did it that way. We also broke it up into 5 chapters with each voice starting off a new section. So if we wanted to cut it up shorter, we could do that. And so essentially we lucked out in that, because we had built so many partnerships on the ground before we arrived in Hawaii, we were able to use this video in a lot of public meetings when they were talking about the monument expansion. And what we kind of heard on the ground was that, in these meetings, there would be groups, opponents in the audience, and just setting the tone and having people in the audience see themselves in the film, see other Hawaiians talking about the importance, kind of took the air out of the tires of the argument that this isn't for Hawaiians. And then the other thing I think I mentioned before is just having a film gives you a reason to gather. So like just the act of having us all sit down and watch something for 5 or 10 minutes to kick off a meeting, which we did at the White House for the Council of Environmental Quality to kick off a meeting at the ground in Hawaii. It just gives people a reason to come together. And sometimes the video is not the important part. It's that it got them there and now they're in the room and we can talk about this issue. So we finished this video in June of 2016. We were able to screen at the White House, as I mentioned, and we had 2 months on the ground screening it for Hawaiian groups. And then in August 2016, we saw success. We were able, President Obama announced the expansion of the monument to 584,000 square miles, 4 times the original size, and it was the largest marine protected area of the world at that time. So it was a huge win for environmentalists, it was a huge win to combat climate change, but it was also a huge win for the Hawaiian community. And that's a lot of these activists here on the left in this picture. They had been calling for this expansion for years. And what's cool is that they were actually, in 2006, they were the first marine national monument. So they started this movement, and then several other countries followed suit. And so 10 years later, they could be again, you know, leading the charge. And it was kind of giving the money back in their hands to manage. And so it was just a win all around, and we were thrilled with all of that.
Excuse me, Julia,
so what did we learn from
Julia? Do you mind just making your screen the full size of the of your? You can
sure.
Because it will be easier to see.
And yeah, anyone feel free to hop in if you're putting chat messages to me. I'm not able to like pull that up into the screen share. So yeah, thank you for chiming in, Julie. Please feel free to do that more. All right, so what do we learn about how we should tell stories and from this experience? One is to center, you know, especially in activism, but really any kind of storytelling, you know, center voices in the frontline communities that are impacted by this. So that was why we chose Native Hawaiians. And, you know, rather than we do have activists at Pew that have been featured in other videos, but we made a decision that this is not our place to insert ourselves in this story. Let's let the people who are affected by this the most and have the most cultural connections speak to it. So that's kind of basic, but that requires building trust with your messengers. And this is something that takes time. And so, you know, it's not something that's easily done in a short video project. And we actually had done previous expeditions there to try to build relationships. But this required me to convince my, you know, supervisors that we needed more time on the ground in Hawaii, not because it's a beautiful place and I wanted sun, but because we needed to build trust with these people. And this is, you know, and this is like, this is a huge lesson in documentary filmmaking in general. Like you're, as a film producer, you're often walking into a scenario and you might be, you know, having someone build trust with someone in a matter of days to have them tell you about the worst day of their lives if you're talking about some kind of personal health issue. And in this case, you know, there is an uneasy alliance in a lot of frontline communities, rightfully so, and especially in Hawaii, where, you know, they've had a history of having reasons not to trust outsiders and people from the lower 48. But there's an uneasy alliance between these environmental conservationists and communities that are impacted by climate change. And so the trust really builds time, and you have to kind of be humble and do your homework. I always spend a long time researching my film subjects, but I spent extra long on this and really, you know, came in with humility and what they wanted to get out of this experience. All that stuff, all those personal relationship building, it's huge in movement building and just, you know, in life. So I think to that point, as you know, building a movement or telling a story, you need to recognize who's already in the space. Chances are you're not the first person to tell this story. So what other stories have been told? What other partners are out there? What other activists are already working? Talk to them first before you start rolling cameras. It's not just trust building. That's also like you can save yourself some time and learn from them. And then those are the allies that you want to build to spread your story and to help advance your movement. And to that point, know your role. I think this, again, in storytelling and in activism, I think from Pew, we knew what we were bringing to the table was resources. We were well funded. We could make a production like this. We could put some money behind marketing it, and access. We had access to politicians. So we went into these communities, and we're not inserting ourselves in your story, but we want to help bring a story to people in power. We do have access to people in power. So I think kind of being humble and knowing your role, knowing, you know, where you are in the space. I would also say know the role of the story. Again, you know, we kept the scope of this project pretty narrow in a sense. We wanted to demonstrate that Native Hawaiians were behind the expansion of this monument. We weren't trying to convince climate deniers that climate change was a thing. Just know, you know, what your story can and can't do and what role it plays in the movement. And then finally, I would say, again, just a basic for all kind of activism, but especially if you want to release a film at a certain time, is find your mobilization moment. In this case, 2016 was the 10-year anniversary of when the monument was created in the first place. It was also the 100-year anniversary of the National Park Service being created. And so Obama actually announced it within that week. And it just, you know, that makes a nice story for them. That makes a nice story for the press. So look for those moments. There's all kinds of, you know, days out there, and Mental Health Awareness Month, all sorts of things that you can peg your movements to. So just be aware of what the mobilization moments are. All right. So I'll shift gears to the second case study, and I put this in progress because we're still learning by the day, because we're still actively crafting and revising the campaign around the social dilemma. So as I mentioned, I'm the impact producer for this film, to crafting a campaign to really make sure the film has an impact in the world. And so I didn't help make the film, but I will speak a little bit. I won't be able to answer many questions to this effect, but I'll speak a little bit about some creative choices in the storytelling for social change. And so what's neat about Exposure Labs is that they basically only take on projects where they think they take on a film project with impact in mind. They want to make a difference. And so past production coral, they actually, which talked about the degradation of coral reefs and coral bleaching around the world and the relation to climate change, they actually did a fair amount of like message testing with different audiences, including kind of some climate deniers, to see like what message resonates or not. And, you know, they made some creative decisions without sacrificing like the truth of it or the, you know, hard-hitting and the urgency of it, but they made some creative decision in the messaging based on like some words or phrases that just completely turned off audiences who were quote unquote beyond the choir, or they wanted to reach the film beyond the choir to do that. So it's great to work for a company that thinks about that. And so a couple creative decisions I know they made to make sure this film had an impact is they thought about their messengers. And that's, again, I'll go back to that, that's key. Basically, they're trying to reveal the invisible in all their filmmaking. And so, you know, choosing former tech insiders, the people that created these inventions, to then say, oh my God, this got out of control, and the like button I thought was going to spread joy and positivity in the world on Facebook is actually causing, you know, leading to teen mental health issues. To have like whistleblowers and tech insiders kind of sounding the alarm on their own creations, they knew would be a powerful messenger, and they knew would underscore the urgency of the issue in a way. So that's number one. Number two was they fictionalized the algorithm with an actor who, you know, acted out in 3 different ways to show you how kind of the bidding with advertising works in real time. And they did that because in more and more they talked with tech insiders, it was just the best way to visualize it and to make something kind of stick and to make it really come alive for people. And so you don't see a lot of hybrid kind of narrative and documentary style, but I think the reason for that was just to visualize something behind your screen. So I'll shift gears to talk about the campaign, and I'm going to talk a little bit, I'll move away from just the storytelling aspect to sort of talk a little bit about lessons learned from the campaign, because one thing I really want us all to kind of think about is like everything with activism and storytelling sort of changes by the day, and you have to be ready to adapt. So I'm hoping that you'll bear with me. This may be a little rough because we're changing things on the fly, but prior to the launch of the film, based on talking to a bunch of partners who had been working in the space before us, talking to some audience members for the screenings that we were able to do pre-COVID, doing some test virtual screenings with people and just monitoring the news, we kind of established that this was really the first film that talked about this issue in a way that's palatable to a general audience. So we knew that general public awareness on like what the problem is with the attention extraction business model was low. We also kind of knew that we were at a unique tipping point where the film could really make a huge splash. And so the film came out in September, right before the election, you know, during the height of COVID, racial justice movements, all of these things which just amplified all the social forces, amplified the fact that, you know, underscored how technology, we need technology, we rely on it to connect, especially during the pandemic. We rely on it to find out about the protests. We rely on it to get our information, especially during you know, the time of COVID, but also in the ways in which it divides us and it's bad for our mental health. So it really was a unique point where we could demonstrate that there was just this imbalance of power, that we all relied on these platforms and they weren't serving us. So I think with all of that, we were like, we can put this issue on the map with this film. And so we saw this film in the campaign really as an agenda setting piece, like let's just spread broad awareness. So with that, our kind of before the launch of the film and before we saw how people reacted to it, just the goal was simple in a way that it was just, let's leverage the film to catalyze new conversations about changing how technology is designed, regulated, and used. So focus in the beginning was just getting the word out to raise awareness. And so that involved, you know, we were lucky to have partners that were pretty well connected to different influencers and celebrities and policymakers. And so all of that was within the parameters of what we could do with Netflix, was to get the film before it was released, a private link to important people that we would hope would talk about it on the day of launch. So some of this really was marketing, and some of it was relationship building. We reached out to a lot of allies that we just wanted to give them a heads up. We wanted them, you know, of course we wanted them to support the film and the campaign, but even if not, they're in this space, we wanted them to find out about the film from us rather than just in the news. So there was a ton of just getting the word out there. And I think because of the moment we were in, and because of that work too, of course, some of it's just luck, this film catalyzed conversations beyond our wildest dreams. So it was the most popular Netflix movie in the US in September. It was the second most watched documentary of all time, reaching 38 million in 28 days. There's other stats here about how many people viewed the trailer, how many screenings and how many conversations happened. And so we quickly realized that like the word was getting out there and that we could probably even move to the next phase of our campaign sooner than we thought. So that was just totally incredible and rather unexpected. So I'm going to talk about the impact of the film in the first 4 months. And we actually have an impact report that I'm happy to share afterwards. There's tons of highlights I could say, but I think some of what was interesting in terms of trying to catalyze the conversation, we noted that 300 plus people registered on our website. So maybe there was more community screenings. And this ranged from like church groups to parent groups to big, you know, screenings that happened at Google, at Nike, at Microsoft, Amnesty International. They're one of our partners, hosted screenings with their chapter. We did a screening at the United Nations. So Jeff and everyone who made the film and was part of the film, they were, you know, participating in conversations every day, twice a day, 3 times a day, going on press, spreading the word. We also were kind of blown away by the policymaker engagement. And so this picture on the right is Senator Lindsey Graham in a hearing with Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey of Twitter, asked them both if they had watched The Social Dilemma. And they both kind of demurred and said they hadn't, or alluded that they hadn't. And he said, you better watch this film because we have a mental health crisis on our hands. And just to hear him frame it that way and to go right to the tech executives to say that really showed us that this film was in the conversation on Capitol Hill, and that already was just a huge impact. And then beyond that, we probably talked about 25 policymakers from around the world across the aisle coming to us wanting to know, what can we do to solve this problem? We saw the film, we're horrified, what can we do? So we were just blown away at just the interest from policymakers to make a difference. And even though Mark Zuckerberg said he was aware of the film and did not to watching it, Facebook actually did put out a statement of the film and trying to rebut some of the points. So that was another sign to us that we had gotten under the skin of big tech. It was big enough that they were talking about it. And so, you know, just the idea of creating pressure and spreading awareness was already happening. We also heard from several partners that were able to help advance the work, their work, because this film helped explain the problem that they've been trying to solve for so many years. And just to have something easy that was in the press, in the national conversation, just helped them maybe get some phone calls they didn't get before, just help them kind of move past that introductory conversation. And so that was really cool to hear too. And then we also got tons of quotes like this in our inbox. This film feels like a friend to me, providing clarity and explanations and putting things in perspective. I hope your film brings back reality. We heard from a lot of people, a lot of young people especially, about like, finally, I've been feeling these things, but now it's in this film, and like, now I get it. Like, we're all being manipulated, and like, it's like we're not alone. And so I think the film achieved all of that. And so we were really blown away by the success. So in the midst, let me get back to this. In the midst of all these things happening, we realized we were flooded. We had a good problem. We were flooded with so much interest. More partners were coming to us, more press was coming to us, and it was actually a lot to handle. It was hard to react to that and also plan for the future. So we took a break. This is something that's important too. Activism, I think Jeff spoke about this at the summit, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. So it feels like you cannot step back in the height of things. You gotta keep reacting, but you actually need to. We needed to create some mental space, and we needed to spend some time. So we did this kind of right before the holidays, things quieted down a little, to reflect, like, now that film's out there in the world, we had put together this whole impact campaign plan prior to launch, but now we can look at real data, real reactions from partners and audience members about how they're reacting. So we talked to tons of partners. We took a step back and read back through our inbox, and did all this work. And basically, oh, I feel old and like messing up the technology. Anyway, so we did this reflection piece, and this is kind of what we learned. Policymakers were eager to act, but they needed to be educated and inspired. We had tons of policymakers coming to us, as I mentioned, saying, what can we do to solve this problem? There were some gaps in knowledge about the problem, which we felt we were suited to talk about, not so much on the recommendation side, but partially like they just want to be inspired to know it's possible. And so some of that is just connecting them to other people who have solutions. Some of that's creating an event where we can use the film and use some of our charismatic speakers to just talk about the problem. So that was a little bit of a light bulb. We also been very inspired by all of you. We were blown away by how young people were activated by the film, engaged with the brand of Exposure Labs, and like truly Gen Z will be the key change agents in a public pressure campaign. And so we'll talk about that more later, but all of you on the call are going to be the ones that help really put pressure on tech companies to reform. And so we just, you know, we had a hunch that might be the case, but that was just solidified by the reaction from so many young people. The other thing is we took a step back. You know, we're storytellers, that's our strength. And we talked to our partners, and a lot of them were saying, you know, this film is great and it explained this issue, but some policymakers can't watch a 90-minute film, and there's still more education to be done. And so if we now have we're now a trusted messenger to explain this problem. So one of the things was like, let's go back to the basics and create more content and tools to advance awareness on this issue. Other thing that's important in any kind of activism and with storytelling as well is to look at the movement and the landscape of who's already out there. And so from what we could see is there were so many people working on different slices of this issue, but it was very fragmented. There was no one group leading the charge talking about kind of connecting the dots on all the issues. And there's also no simple solutions, which does make it sometimes hard for a simple question. So while all that was true and sort of on the downside, the urgency of reform has just never been greater. And I think that was really crystallized, unfortunately, on January 6th with the attacks on the Capitol. People really were making the connection that, like, you know, online amplification of hate speech, of conspiracy theories led to offline harm, and like we have to do something about it. So we do believe we have a moment now where we can push for reform in a way that we couldn't before. The other thing that we realized where we could present a value to this space in the movement was that we're now a gateway for a mass audience on this issue. So people are coming to us from all angles, and frankly, like, I don't think we have business, you know, giving specific recommendations to policymakers, but we also, in the process of, you know, researching for the film, we learned about a lot of experts. In the process of developing relationships with partner, we learned about experts. So a lot of what we do is just matchmaking behind the scenes. Like, hey, we don't know the answer, you know, Senator so-and-so, but talk to this person, they do. And so, you know, it's that connected piece is actually really important. So with all of that, we sort of adapted our theory of change a little bit. And so whenever you're crafting a campaign, you want to explain how can you get to the change that you think should happen. And so for us, if the problem is that, you know, big social is built around incentives that are at odds with the interests of humanity, then, you know, our mission or our theory of change is that we want to use the power of storytelling to help realign technology with the public good. And we're going to do that by kind of leveraging our strengths and looking at what we learned from the first 4 months of launch. And so we'll do that by sustaining public pressure. So back to storytelling, we'll develop content and more regular campaigns for people to participate in to keep urgency on the issue and keep the conversation in the spotlight. We also do want to equip policymakers with tools to help them advance regulation. Again, we're not the experts here, but we do believe we can describe the problem and connect them to other experts. And the final part is where you guys all come in, activate youth. We want to support the next generation of humane tech leaders with resources, mentorship, like we're doing here with mobilization opportunities. We really think that you all are the leaders for this change. And so we want to help support your movements because that's ultimately what's going to make this work. So we're getting to the end here, but what that's going to look like, just to give some specifics about what this means. And again, this is all in progress and you're getting a bit of a preview because you're in the special fireside chat into what's coming up next. And so for our goal to sustain public pressure, I can't go into quite the details yet, but we will have a campaign coming out in the next couple weeks with a partner that will have some legitimate calls for policy change and action for people to sign on to. So being a little cryptic there, but we're going to be releasing exclusive bonus footage clips. So everyone wants content. That's what we're good at. We had a lot of stuff from the cutting room floor that didn't make the film. And so what we've done is we've created tons of little clips about the mental health issue, about discrimination, about, the problem with our share. And because there's so many groups that have different, focus areas on the problems, we'll be releasing some of those bonus clips publicly. And then our plan is to continue, there's going to be all these different moments that emerge in the news. Some we could predict, some we can't. But if we have a series of video clips and stories kind of ready for different themes, we can then leverage them and release them at the right time. So that's our next plan. We also just soft launched a social media reboot, which is a pledge to help you personally realign your use with technology and also take some steps to protect you and others from misinformation. And so that's a soft launch, but we'll be putting that out kind of more publicly in the next couple weeks. And we also want to explore the idea of having people share their stories. To that point, personal storytelling is so powerful. So many people have come to us already to explain how tech has impacted them. We think there's a lot of moments. There's hearings coming up. There's like moments where the Facebook oversight board may decide to reinstate Trump back on the plane. It could happen in the spring. And so we're wondering, can we project these quotes of people who've been harmed by technology outside the Capitol? Or can we do something big like that? We're very much exploring. And so just an idea. So for when we talk about equipping policymakers, what we're planning on doing there is participating in some screenings with Congress and with Canadian Parliament. And then we're thinking that where we can best be suited is to kind of describe the film and the problems as we see it in the film in a sort of briefing for policymakers, and then do kind of a lookbook with all the experts we've met along the way to connect them to them. So just put something visual together for them to help just provide some basic tools. And then finally, activate youth. And there's tons of ideas, and a lot of these ideas you will come up with yourselves. But one thing we want is to create an educational cut of the film to be used in schools and other kind of materials that teachers can use to talk about the film in schools, because we know youth are such an important audience. We want to toy youth-led public pressure campaigns. And this idea, I think we're inspired by this partnership with LookUp Live and doing sort of this grant. And are there other opportunities for leadership funds just to continue to support the young leaders that are already out there on this issue? So here are some general takeaways about what we learned kind of revamping our campaign. And I'll tie some of this back to story. But from the get-go, identify your trusted messengers. This goes back to the story of Hawaii and also the reason they chose tech insiders, but who is your audience and who do they need to hear from? That's crucial in stories, but also in like, who are your spokespeople for the movement? Be adaptable, like I mentioned, especially with this issue. It's changing by the day in the news, and we start working on something, it's no longer relevant because Facebook pulled news in Australia and you have to pivot. And so I think one thing I'm taking to heart is that we should come up with a plan, but we should leave a lot of space to react to the moment and just be ready to change and just keep your finger on the pulse, because you kind of have to ride the momentum if your issue that you're working on really is in the zeitgeist. To that point, listen to your partners, your allies, and your critics. You can learn a lot from them. We did a kind of deep dive where we pulled back and talked to our partners and listened to some of the criticism we received in the film and just sort of rethought how we move forward. Don't let it tear you down, but learn from it. And that goes back to being adaptable. Trust your gut and remember your core strengths. That's for us was, let's go back to the basics of storytelling because that's what we're good at. But I think that in life, in your career, in activism, especially because it's like, the goal changes, goalpost changes all the time. You'll often feel like an imposter and like, what are we doing? And are we making a difference? I know it sounds cheesy, but truly believe in yourself and leverage what you are good at and use that to bring to the movement. And we're all figuring it out together, and movements are messy. So, no one really knows what they're doing. And then I would just say, see what the movement needs and where you fit in. Our partners told us we need content. That's what we're good at. It's just about listening to that and not trying to reinvent the wheel of what a partner or ally is already doing. And then, remember the power and limit of stories. Stories can help catalyze these conversations. They can create an emotional bond and visualize an issue that you can't explain, but it's not going to do everything. There needs to be a ton of other work and allies and partners and logistics that go along with it. So a story alone won't change the world, but it can plant the seeds to do so. I think we can do questions, and I'll stop sharing.
Julia, thank you. That was brilliant and amazing and inspirational. I love hearing the stories from campaigns that are outside where our current heads are. I'm a big fan of looking at it's called benchmarking in the business world, but looking at what other organizations have done or other campaigns, even if they're outside your sector, and learning from them. And I thought particularly the messenger piece that was so important when in the I'm not going to attempt to say the name of the monument, Papa's Place.
Papa's perfect.
Papa's Place. And but just the importance of choosing your messenger. And we heard a little bit of that with Samantha as well at the tail end of her presentation. And I think it's important and I'm curious if our innovators in Leadership Lab and LookUp affiliated folks here understand that you are the messengers, and that's what, it's so important when you're thinking about this movement and the social dilemma and LookUp and others saying, Gen Z is so important. You are our messengers. You are the team. You are the voices that need to be heard about how this is affecting your lives and the positive life that you want to lead. I love that, bring reality back concept of take back reality from the tech companies and put it back in our hands. So thinking about all this different campaign messaging. But anyway, that was a really important thing that I hope everybody's reflecting on. And there were a couple other areas, but I'm going to pause and suggest that if you want to ask Julia a question, you can raise your hand, or what I'm going to try to do is get it. So can everybody, I think Julia's the only one spotlighted. I'm going to try to get you into gallery view so everybody can see everyone. And then I'm also going to pin, nope, that's going to make you arrogant, sorry. I'll just remove that. Anyway, so just raise your hand if you have a question, and you can, just a quick fun fact, if Julia's not at the top of your screen and you want her to be there, you can pin her there. Or I learned now that Zoom, you can move participant boxes around and set it. It's a new thing. Anyway, I will, we've got two folks have raised their hands. So Caitlin, why don't you kick it off and then we'll go to Michael.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for talking to us. I actually have two questions. They're both different. The first is, you talked about the release of like an educational cut, and my group within LookUp has been trying to provide like mentorships to Gen Z, like mostly like people currently in junior high school. How do you think you can release a cut that will actually keep their attention? Because these kids are watching YouTube videos on like 2 times speed to like, they can't even, my sister is 15, she cannot get through a full TikTok. Like her mind is just, she's done, she's bored. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know even the production team is like, how do we distill this complicated problem into a 40-minute educational cut? So in addition to like a 40-minute educational cut that teachers can use, we are looking at shorter clips. And that is, I don't know. Yeah, we are looking at different models because we realize that like everyone has different attention spans. And so we're looking at some shorter clips that can be engaging. And we're even thinking about, like now that we're trusted to explain this issue, it doesn't necessarily need to be exactly the film cutting room floor footage. Like maybe there's an animated explainer one day down the road, or maybe there's a way to engage, influencers on the platforms where folks are, maybe there's a TikTok influencer that can just talk about the film. I mean, there's a lot of that going on too. So, we can't get everyone to sit down and watch the full thing, but I think there's ways of grabbing their attention where they are using those platforms, and we are kind of exploring that, but it's a challenge, and it will be a challenge.
And my other question was, since you mentioned Australia, is there anything that you guys intend to do to put pressure on that situation in Australia? Is there anything you can do? I was just interested.
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually do have a partner in Australia. They were developing an open letter to put pressure on Facebook. And the thing is, so there are things you can do. There are ways that, like, just as a, with our name and brand, we can sign on to an open letter to help put some pressure. With that one's a little tricky. And this is the other thing, is that things are happening so fast that you need to take time to assess, and we need to figure out, like, what does it make sense to put our name behind that specific case. While from our side of things, we think what Facebook just pulling the news was the wrong move, and it shows how much power they have. That actually the legislation is also a little bit flawed. I think the intent behind it is great. So the intent is that, like, let's pay news organizations for their content, but the way it works, it really favors big news corporations like, News Corp, and actually kind of hurts smaller news organizations. So everything's complicated. We decided to stay out of that one, but those types of things are opportunities to enter. But it's a good point, because, like, it's so tempting to just jump on everything. And I know I feel that way sometimes, but we don't react as quickly as maybe some people would like us to, because we have to, like, do the research and make sure it makes sense to sign on.
Thank you. Michael, you're next, then Tyler, then Renee.
Good evening. Thank you so much for speaking with us. I do have to go at 7 o'clock right now, but I guess I'll ask one question before I head out. I thought it was amazing that you got responses from so many policymakers. Do you think that them watching the films themselves made that sort of impact, or the fact that their constituents were watching this film, or sort of a mix of both?
Mix of both. I think that in some cases their aide watched the film and were like, you need to watch this, or maybe they just were like, you need to talk to them, and they trust their aide. I think at the end, if it weren't popular and their constituents weren't watching it, they wouldn't have any reason to. But because it got such coverage, I think that's probably a reason a lot of them did watch it. And these are issues that many policymakers are concerned about. So yeah, I think it's a combination. But that it does, and as you know, if you're trying to reach legislators, you need to reach their constituents that need to give them a reason to care. So that does play a part.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Michael. Tyler?
Hey, so yeah, I like a lot of the stuff that you had to say about messengers and making sure that, they're a part of the community. Something I wanted to ask you was, like, how do you make sure that the people that you're giving the spotlight to are legit and kind of trusted within their communities if you don't have, like, the means to go to those communities, or the connections to those communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of research goes into that, but you're right. So, like, even just, our production team does a ton of research to vet the experts they talk to make sure that, like, they're not just making things up. And so that's one slice of it. But you're right. If you're not trusted in the community, I think, like, actually, just to be totally honest, I think that's where developing the alliances and developing partners really makes sense. And so I kind of look back, it was 2016 when we did the video in Hawaii, and, like, part of me wonders, like, should we have produced that video, or should, at this point where I'm sitting now with a little bit of space and time, should we have just funded a Hawaiian production company to do it? Because they'd be trusted. They already know the story. They didn't have to do as much homework as I did. And so that may be, or maybe, I think there's a case where maybe you're not telling the story. Maybe you're supporting someone else who is telling the story. There's not a clean answer on that. It's a really good question, but yeah, build as much trust as you can and know maybe when to step back as well.
So with kind of the storybooking that you're doing right now, and y'all are fielding in a bunch of things from a bunch of different people, I'm sure, what are some of the things that y'all are doing there where there's not necessarily a specific community?
Yeah, with that, we aren't currently launched where we're getting people to submit stories. People have been doing that organically, which has been helpful because we're sort of starting to see what we're seeing is a lot of teens submitting stories about, how these platforms are making them feel bad about themselves. Unfortunately, we are getting, parents who are saying they've lost, kids to suicide, and they think social media played a part. And we've been trying to, again, we don't feel like we can provide them resources. We've been connecting them to partners like Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood, formal, like, support groups around that. And so right now we don't want to limit it. I think if we do launch this idea, it would really be all stories, and just kind of see what we get. And the point would be to make an impact. So I think, like, if we're thinking about it strategically, like, if there's a hearing, on March 25th for the Energy and Commerce Committee, and they're bringing in, Facebook and YouTube to talk about misinformation. We're not going to be ready at this point, but an opportunity would be who's sitting on those committees, what, constituents, like who are their constituents, and get stories from those locations. So we're thinking about it like, we'll start broad, but I think as moments arise, we'll try to tie it to where they can have the most impact.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Renee?
Hi, Julia. Thank you so much. I love like the focus on it being a holistic movement and not just like a digital campaign that contributing to the social media. And I guess that's kind of where my question stems from. And I apologize if you kind of already went over this. I came in late, unfortunately. But so our like friend over our startup is a product for young children, right? So when I'm trying to get the message out, I feel like it's almost wrong to be advertising on like TikTok and to be trying to get the word out on social media already, because I don't want to contribute to like the negative relationship that people already do have with technology. And also, relating that to storytelling, and what Caitlin was asking about, like, having shorter and shorter attention spans because of the short little infographics that we swipe through on social media all the time. How can we, do you think the genie's out of the bottle on that? Like, can we tell longer stories? Do you think that we can go back, or do you think sort of we have to kind of work with what we have to get the message out?
I think for some people, the genie may be out of the bottle. I don't think it's, irreversible. We struggle with the same thing. The social dilemma is on social media platforms. And that is something we debated internally for a long time. We're like, are we huge hypocrites for going on these platforms? But we ultimately decided that we needed to fight fire with fire. And if you're trying to get people to stop smoking, you need to talk to smokers. So if you're trying to change social media, you need to activate people who are on these platforms and be part of the good content that hopefully filters to them. So I think it's okay. I think, if you're trying to reach young people, I think you can reach them through the same tools. There's positive, it's not like these platforms are all bad. There's positives and negatives. In terms of the attention span, there's a lot of research that yes, our attention spans are getting shorter in part because of this. And I don't have the answer whether we can, reverse that or not. I think that, as many of you probably know, that doing those little breaks and doing those detoxes can help you gain attention back. So maybe there's something there with, promoting that on these platforms. But yeah, again, not an easy answer, but.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Nicola?
Hey, Julia, and thank you again for coming and speaking with us today. So Renee's question actually got me thinking a little bit. And I know you had mentioned, the role of journalists and telling emotionally powerful stories, and even The Social Dilemma is a very emotionally powerful film. Yet, the film itself is like arguing against social media as being very emotionally manipulative.
Right.
And so I guess for you, like, where do you see the line as a journalist, a filmmaker, an activist in between being like emotionally powerful and human, but also not being emotionally manipulative?
Yeah, these are all amazing questions that are hard to answer. I've thought a lot about that. Storytelling for impact. Anytime you're telling a story, you're trying to distill a complex issue into something where the mass public can gain on, you're inherently simplifying something that shouldn't be simplified. So I think it's a judgment call. Like, you don't want these stories to be extractive. You don't want to sensationalize, but you do need to weave a narrative. You do need to have an impact. And so I think it just comes down to, showing nuance, not just sensationalizing, but yeah, you do, hopefully, like, the truth in the story will be enough. And I think that the urgency of this problem, like, I don't think and people may disagree, and that's fine. I don't think it was overblown in the film. Like, I think we did present that fairly. So yeah, I think just letting the story speak for itself and letting your messengers speak for themselves. But yeah, you raise an interesting point. It is a fine line.
Julia, I want to ask a question, again, building on what Samantha had talked about, Samantha Bolton, for those of you who weren't at the last session. And she'd made the comment that a tweet is not a campaign. And you had made the comment that the film is just one of the tools. Can you talk a little bit more about, like, what it takes to really build a campaign? And then the second part of that question is, you can feel like you just want to give up because it's, as Jeff said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. What are the important things, I'm sort of asking leading questions, that you need to do to keep your followers, keep people motivated as as a campaign leader? How do you keep the energy going when perhaps it's another couple more years before you even get in to see that senator's aide or get them to watch the film or whatever it might be. So how do you, that was kind of a two-part question. You talk about comprehensive campaign, and then how do you keep your campaign activists and advocates and believers and followers motivated?
Yeah, I think to answer the first part, if you're looking at the story just being kind of one tool in the toolkit for movement building, I think you want to align it with a lot of other activities, and there's an art to the pacing of that, and that's all about paying attention to what moments are coming up. And so I don't know if I mentioned this, so hopefully this will help clarify a little, but with the campaign to try to expand the monument, you know, we did this video, and those same Native Hawaiians that were featured in the film also signed on to a letter to the White House, along with scientists. And we also did a campaign where we had scientists write a letter to the White House, and we had, you know, I don't remember how many people signed on asking them to do this. You also have to build a groundswell of support. You can do that through petitions, depending on your topic. A lot of it's behind the scenes talks too. You know, if you're lucky enough to have access to power, quite frankly, a lot of it's like, we were asking them what they needed from us, and then how can we, you know, gin up support, and then recognizing the story is a seed, but you're also just one player in this huge space. And so we were working with tons of allies and partners. We had partners mobilizing Hawaiians on the ground and setting up screenings. We also knew kind of our brand as Pew is that we were trusted messengers in a policy space, and we weren't actually big grassroots mobilizers. So there are things that, like, you know, a Greenpeace can say and should say that Pew should never say, but we all work together, and we're like, hey, you know, we want those folks to, you know, so working, kind of coordinating. And that was something we did with this campaign as well. We coordinated with our partners. We let them know we were doing this film, and we were like, we'll give this B-roll to these media outlets. Like, there was a ton of coordination, and there's, you know, infighting and messiness with all of that too. But everyone had the same goal. And so we kind of tried to find our lanes and stay in them. Again, it's always messy, but that's another thing to the building the movement, is that you know, use your partners and have them each take on different activities, and try to be honest with yourselves about where you're best suited to lead, and where someone else might be able to lead. So that's one thing. And then, yeah, maintaining hope. It's funny, we were all overwhelmed by, again, this is busy and what we needed to do, that we actually did kind of suffer for some morale issues. And I will say two things to that. One, we actually instituted some, just, you know, I'll say, like, self-care is almost a radical action in movement building. You have to take care of yourself. You cannot be running on teams. You can't inspire other people if you're fried. And so we actually did, like, take some Fridays off and stop using Slack as much, and, like, talked about as a team about how we were very open about feeling overwhelmed. So that's number one. Number two, celebrate your successes. We spent part of that retreat, we over the holidays or before the holidays, reflected on how the campaign had done so far, and the goal was to, like, see how we should move forward. But a lot of that was like, what are the wins? What are the successes? Take a moment to breathe and look at everything that you've done. That will fuel you so much to move forward. So yeah, add pinpoints to stop and celebrate. Thank your colleagues for their time, recognize what they're doing, check in with them. Also talking to you, talking to young people, like, that's really what's motivated me. And so, and just seeing the hope there. So talk to other positive people. You know, when you're feeling down, there may be another activist who's on the uptick and they're having a good time. Like, use your network to support each other, celebrate your wins, even the little ones, because yeah, it really helps fuel you to move forward.
And that's true for those of you who, you know, you're coming up with these ideas and these campaigns, and some of them might be your primary goal to do, or your side gig, or just a project you're working on for now. But if some of you who end up working in companies too, and you're trying to drive social change from the, you know, or corporate change from the inside of your organization, it's going to take time, and you do need to find those wins and find your people inside those organizations, because you can change. You do go work for Facebook, you go working knowing that you're going to try to have a positive influence on their corporate policies. It might take you time, but celebrate the small wins when you get them. And I think that that's something to keep in mind as you're out there, even in the professional world, or building your own companies that are, it takes everything. It's not just about the activists, it's the people who work in companies too, and who own their own companies as well, that are part of the solution. So I know I ended this on, these are ending on an odd time, but 7:15, that's when I said we would end, so we'll pay attention to the time. I want to thank Julia very much for joining us. This was incredibly inspirational, of course. Susan, I don't know, I'll give you our co-founder, Susan Reynolds. I'd love if you have closing thoughts you wanted to share. Feel free to unmute yourself if the fire alarm's not still going off.
No, I know. Yeah, we'll see if it goes off. No, I just underscore the importance of Gen Z, of you and Julia, seeing, you know, that a new part of your campaign really is to activate the youth. It's just this constant affirmation of knowing your power and how much the world is looking to you. And so, yes, you know, the instinctive intuitions that you have and the experiences like Caitlin, absolutely what you said about the 15-year-olds and they can't watch a TikTok. Julie and I don't, I mean, Julie and I, Julia, you know, and I, that's so far out of our world, right? I mean, and I've heard that over and over again. And that's really important in the messaging and what we do, right? Because if we send long emails or, you know, lengthy, you know, documents or diatribes or whatever it is that isn't grabbing the attention. So, I mean, that's really, and I think particularly around this issue more than any, why you are so critical, and your younger peers and siblings, you know, I mean, it's a real reminder to keep looking to them because, you know, they're different, right? A 12-year-old is different and having a different experience with social media and technology than even you are. So just circling back to how important you are to us and how thrilling it is that, you know, that we're carrying this forth with you.
Thank you, everyone. And Julia, we are so honored to be an impact partner with the Social Dilemma and representing the youth and bringing and helping to, oh, hello, Bruin. Sorry, he got excited.
Representing the dogs.
There he goes. Anyway, but I love Zoom for this reason. It humanizes us. Kids run through things. Girlfriends walk through backgrounds. Anyway, that was Bruin. And but anyway, we're so grateful to be your partner and have these amazing young people on our team to make it all happen. So we're psyched to be a part of this with you and grateful. But thank you, everybody. And this will be available on video recorded. So if your teammates would like to watch it, I suggest they do, and we'll make it available to everybody in the community hub. And it will be on our YouTube channel as well. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks, Julia.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.